Adoption and expensive, two words that do not always belong together. There are 120,000 children in the United States that are waiting for a forever family, and adopting through this option is extremely affordable. I'm Marcy Bursac, an adoptive mom of a sibling pair, and also the author of The Forgotten Adoption Option. Twice monthly, I will interview people like adoptive parents and adopted children who have been touched by foster care adoption. My goal is to find more forever families and increase awareness about foster care adoption, because if it were you or me, we would want someone to do this for us. Welcome to the Forgotten Adoption Option podcast. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing one of my heroes, the president and CEO of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption, Rita Soronen. Hi, Rita.
Hi, Marcy. I am so honored to be with you. Thank you for inviting me to this.
It's such a treasured moment for me. Rita has been a voice for vulnerable children for the past 30 years. She currently leads the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption as its president and CEO. She has devoted her career to being a voice for children waiting to be adopted through the foster care system and has been successful in transforming key aspects of the foster care adoption process and system in North America. I am especially excited to have Rita as my guest this month because the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption just celebrated the 10,000th adoption through its program. What a beautiful milestone, Rita, that you have helped 10,000 children find their forever family.
It's an exciting day, and we're so glad to be sharing this with you. And when you think about it, Marcy, that's 10,000 families, 10,000 children who were at risk of aging out of care who now have that safety and security of home. So it's an incredible day for us.
It is incredible because so many things happen when we bring stability and love into the lives of children. And I'm just going to dive right in because for me, the Dave Thomas Foundation, I feel like I found you all when my husband and I were going through the foster care adoption training, and I was trying to figure out how to navigate my employer. So you all have been part of my family's journey since really the beginning of our adoption process. And so for those that may not be as familiar, I think many people know of, okay, there's Wendys restaurant, and there's this guy, Dave Thomas, that founded it, but they might not know a lot about this foundation that he started. So can you tell us about Dave Thomas's heart for foster care adoption and why starting a foundation was the best way to make an impact on helping children who need us most in North America?
Absolutely. And what folks may not know is that Dave Thomas was adopted. And although he was adopted as an infant and spent a few days in foster care, he also had a difficult family situation. His mother passed away when he was young. His father was a worker that moved frequently. And as a teenager, he actually left home and struck out on his own. And so he uniquely understood both that passion for adoption, because he still felt family was incredibly important, even with those challenges. But he understood, I think, particularly older youth in foster care who frequently are just out there on their own and having to figure out how to get a job, get a place to live, make themselves successful. So he then became this incredibly successful CEO of the Wendys company and the Wendys franchise system. And embedded in their heart is this notion of giving back to the community. So as he was getting later on in his career and moving a little bit out of that active CEO position, really wanted to start a foundation, the foundation that focused uniquely on adoption. But for him, for that conversation in 1992 when he started this organization, that kind of adoption that was not a robust conversation. We weren't talking a lot about kids in foster care and the systems and how to make sure that those children have every effort on their behalf. And he wisely started us as a national nonprofit public charity. It's not a family foundation or a community foundation or a corporate foundation, because in making it a nonprofit organization, he knew we would have to get out there and talk to the public in order to raise funds to keep going and to do the work that we do. But in doing that, we inevitably raised awareness about this cause and got that message out in a much more robust way. So, it is all due honor to Dave Thomas for the vision that he had and for the passion that he brought, not only from himself, but infused throughout the Wendys restaurants, its franchisees and suppliers.
And it's amazing, like you said, the strategy of thinking nationally and starting a conversation. Because you're right. I think a lot of people are very aware of infant adoption, adopting a baby, and they're aware of international adoption, adopting a child from a different country. But the foster care adoption space, while you all have done incredible work, it's still a work in progress, right? Which is why, yeah, my book, which we'll talk about later, I named it The Forgotten Adoption Option, because people forget that there's this whole other subset of children that often get overlooked.
Exactly.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit, because some of the listeners are people that might be thinking about this down the road or know someone. Some of them have already adopted or fostered through foster care. But for some, the term youth, what age range is that? And why are youth in foster care? And then some of those youth are available for adoption and others are not. Can you help kind of dispel some of that confusion?
Sure. Children enter foster care first through no fault of their own. They've been abused, neglected, abandoned, and this system was created to provide a safety net for them, hopefully while systems surrounded their biological family and they could go home to their family. They might have just needed some assistance. Neglect is sometimes issues of poverty or of food or, those kinds of things that a family just needs a hand up in order to thrive. And so our goal is to get those kids back home. So for some children, though, that can't go home, the abuse is so egregious, or the case has wound its way through the juvenile justice and the child welfare system for the period of time that the court finally decides this family cannot be made safe enough for this child. And so they legally and permanently sever that relationship of child from family. And now we have essentially a legal orphan waiting for another family to step forward and adopt. Within the child welfare system, those children who've been freed for adoption can be from birth to 18, but about half of the children are age 8 or 9 or older. And what we know from research is the day a child is in foster care, they've been freed for adoption, and they turn 9, the likelihood of them being adopted decreases significantly because people traditionally tend to be looking for babies. They're not aware that there are older children in the foster care system. So we tend to differentiate at the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. We want every child, whether it's a child in China or a child in the US, whether it's a baby or whether it's a 16-year-old. We believe that every child deserves a family, right? That's their birthright. But for
Absolutely.
the foster care system, there's this horrible disconnect that every year 20,000 of those children who've been freed for adoption, our job is to find them a family. We fail 20,000 times a year over year. Those children age out of foster care. They turn 18 and leave without the family we promised them. So that's where the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption has stepped in and said, we want to work on behalf, certainly of all children, and advocate for all children, but we want to make sure that those children most at risk of aging out of care, children age 9 and older, children in sibling groups, children with special needs, children who've been in foster care for so long that they give up on themselves and they give up on the notion of family. And so they resist efforts at adoption. Those are the children and youth who we want to work on behalf. And those are indeed, I think, not only are all children in foster care tend to be the forgotten children, but certainly those older youth who've been there and the ones that have a lot of myths and misperceptions that surround them as well. So that's what we mean by youth in foster care. And that's how kids get into foster care. And hopefully, their trajectory out is that they go home. But if they can't go home, then we've got to get them into an adoptive family.
Right. Because that adoptive family, I mean, thinking about at age 18, right? Like the rest of your life ahead of you includes things like maybe getting married and going to school and having all these wonderful milestones of just even holidays and having a family there for those important moments. And so I'm really glad to be able to help our listeners know more about where the need really is. Because I think sometimes we don't know if we don't see it or we don't think about it. And so you really helped put some details behind that. And you all, since 2004, you've been utilizing a program that you designed called Wendys Wonderful Kids. And this program is your organization funds and trains recruiters all across the country at selected adoption agencies, both public and private. And it's a child-focused recruitment model. In St. Louis, we have an organization in town, the Foster Adoptive Care Coalition, that has one of these recruiters. Can you tell me about the program and really what the focus is on?
Absolutely. And we started this program around 2004 because we saw that gap. Those children were continuing to age out of foster care. Our mission's really very simple: to dramatically increase the adoptions of children from North America's foster care system. But on any given day, if you had asked me, Rita, how many kids did you help get adopted today? We wouldn't be able to tell you. And at that time, we were doing great awareness campaigns and public service announcements and resources and education. But we really wanted to step in where that gap existed with those children and youth who were aging out of foster care. We looked around, we looked for what evidence-based programs are there on behalf of these children. And although there were some emerging best practices, there was nothing that a social worker, a program that a social worker could grab onto and say, here's how you get a 16-year-old adopted. Here's a method that works for those kids most at risk of aging out of care. So we pulled together what we called the Child-Focused Recruitment Program, which really is just good social work. Carry a small caseload of the longest waiting children, develop an intense relationship by meeting with and talking to that child regularly, because then you'll learn about the child's journey through the foster care system. Do a deep dive into the child's case file, and in that case file, I guarantee you're going to find potential adoptive resources, from extended family members to former foster parents to teachers, counselors, and then continue to go along with this child on this journey and quickly find an adoptive family. And if they're not in that first circle of extended family members or someone known to the child, then continue to reach out to the community and find an adoptive family. And it's not about finding the perfect child for a family. It's about finding the perfect family for a child. And that magic happens because the recruiter, the child-focused recruiter, understands the child. We called it Wendy's Wonderful Kids because we also went to our Wendys partners and said, if you increase your fundraising for the foundation, we can begin to think about growing this program. What we do is give a grant to an organization like the Foster Care Adoption Coalition. They hire a full-time adoption recruiter that implements this program and gets kids adopted. So it has grown from 7 pilot sites in 2004 when we started testing it to now more than nearly 500 full-time adoption professionals across the United States and Canada are working on behalf of these children. And that's where that 10,000 adoption number came from. We've grown dramatically in the last 5 years, and so that number has increased significantly then. But we're just so pleased that we can partner with so many organizations, so many dedicated adoption professionals in order to get this job done.
And it's such an incredible model to scale it nationally, but really what you've done, and I loved your words about really zooming in on the child, like magnifying the child in the middle of all of this and thinking who might already know this child. And it's beautiful how you all have taken such a simple approach, right? Like you look at the child and you look at who might know the child or kind of their network, and you try to find a potential adoptive home. It's such a beautiful thing. And I'm really curious, you mentioned you're in 500 sites currently. And as you think about expanding, what would that look like? More sites, specific cities that might be kind of overlooked right now? What kinds of things are you looking at?
Exactly. And for us, expansion and scaling means, it's lovely to have 1 or 2 recruiters across a state. And so the recruiters carry a caseload of 12 to 15 children. So that might be 30 children that otherwise weren't having someone advocating for family for them. But the reality is, in that state, there might be 2,000 children in that category waiting. And so for us, it's taking a program to scale probably means developing a co-investment relationship with a city or a county to say, look, these kids are in government systems. Philanthropy can step forward and help, and we can help you at the front end to get this program embedded, to help get, maybe it takes 30 to 40 recruiters across the state to serve that population of children and youth. But ultimately, as you begin to drive this program, get it embedded as best practice, and move children to adoption, we're also saving not only children's lives, but we're saving the state, the county, significant dollars by moving them out of foster care and into adoptive homes. And so at some point, that balance of philanthropic support diminishes a little bit while the government takes on the cost and the responsibility for this program. We've been able to do that successfully in 10 states. And so we are now on the trajectory for the next 5 years to get 10 more states scaled. And ultimately, with the goal by 2028, we will have Wendy's Wonderful Kids child-focused recruitment model embedded in all 50 states and District of Columbia as business as usual, again, for this target population of children, older youth, sibling groups, children with special needs.
Rita, that's incredible. I think my
No.
mouth is like on the floor. Is that just to me? I love that you all are over, like you're taking a macro approach of seeing how to come alongside of existing systems. But what I also love, because you mentioned, yes, we're saving children's lives. Yes, we're helping the government save money. But then there's, yes, we're actually preventing future problems, right? In terms of healing family units, in terms of maybe children that are aging out without that forever family making different choices. And so it's just incredible the expanded impact you all are able to make by doing the work that you do. It's incredible. But I imagine, 15 years of doing this program, you've probably seen some challenges and successes. What makes your program or your approach
I think what
different?
makes it different is this notion that we start with every child deserves a family, not just some children, but every child, whether it's a 16-year-old who's been in and out of the juvenile detention center because of the trauma he's experienced in his life, and he's had some acting out behaviors, or it's the sibling group of three, one is 10, one is 12, and one is 15. One may have identified special needs. These aren't unadoptable children. These aren't children unworthy of a family. We start with the notion that every child deserves a family, and we will never write in a case file unadoptable, or let's put this child on the aging out list, right? And let's provide them some resources so that at 18 they might be able to find themselves an apartment and a job, but they're still going to be without a family at 20, at 30, at 40, when they still need a family. So I think that's the difference. A little bit of a difference too is we really don't subscribe to public displays of children. We know that those work. Websites, for example, they work for some children, typically younger children. But what do they say to those children, particularly older youth, who have their face on a website, but they don't get adopted? It just reinforces that I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy, I'm not valued enough to have a family. So we want to make this a very personalized, responding to the child's needs approach. And we know it's also evidence-based. We put in place a long-term randomized control trial, rigorous evaluation from 2007 to 2011 that compared this model against business as usual in 26 states. And we found through the evidence that it's up to 3 times more successful than business as usual, exactly for this target population of children. So I think it's those things, the evidence base, the starting from the belief that all children deserve families, and then sticking with these kids for as long as it takes. We don't give up on them. We don't let them age out of the system.
I love the approach of putting the child first. I just think about, like, an analogy is, if you think about, if your parent is ill and you're trying to find the best care provider in the area, you're not going to post online. You might do like a social media post and ask for recommendations, but many people would probably go with their parent to that appointment to help figure out whatever was going on. And I love that you all have taken the same level of care and intentionality with children, because you're right, adoptuskids.org is out there, and there are profiles there. And I often have wondered that too, because my children, I have a sibling pair, and when I was first introduced to them via email, what I thought was really interesting is they had a paragraph each, but there was no photo. And to me, that was like kind of like a foggy story then, of like, how do I get to know you? And then I got to read like inches of paper from different reports and things. And so I love that you all are having these social workers get to know the children so that they can then interact in a way as if they're really an extension of their family, or a really close friend. So it's beautiful. And I wonder, Rita, kind of going backwards, we were talking about some of the kind of negative outcomes that happen if kids don't get adopted and grow up without that. What are some of those risks? Because I know there's a lot of wonderful data, and the foundation really pays attention to that and tracks that. What are some of the risks that teens and sibling groups that age out can face
Exactly.
if
And
they're
they're
not adopted.
profound when you think about it on a life basis. And this is not because they're bad kids. I don't want to give any kind of misinformation, but children and youth who age out of foster care at 18 or 21, if the state allows them to stay for a bit at 21, they age out without a family. They don't have that safety net to make a mistake, right? And so we know that that first year out of foster care, if a youth ages out, they're at a much higher risk of homelessness. 1 in 5 is homeless at some point during that first year. And those are the ones we know about. There are a lot that couch surf or just manage to get by. That alone should drive us to make change. But then that's compounded by an inability to get adequate education or employment, that a significant number of females are early parents. They become teen parents or early in their 20s. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing, but if they're on their own and they don't have a support system around them, they can begin to move back into systems. A significant increase of substance abuse or moving back into systems of being incarcerated, all because think of just one example of a youth ages out of care. He manages to find an apartment and a job, but his car breaks down and he can't get to work, and he doesn't have an employer that really cares about it, and so he loses his job, he loses his place to live, and he's on the street when any other 18 or 19-year-old might have been able to call mom or dad and say, I need some help, right? And get that assistance. So we want to avoid those negative consequences, and we can avoid those negative consequences.
You're right. It's a stark difference because just
Right.
by base of what the support system is, it can really change the outcome. And Rita, I know that some people listening are like,
Yeah,
this is not for me, or maybe not right now. And but they think, but I can understand how these children, I want to help them. And so can you give some examples of ways people can help raise awareness about waiting children in foster care adoption that might be outside of the role of adopting a
absolutely.
child or sibling
Absolutely.
group?
First and foremost, they can simply learn about the system and the children in foster care, and then they can become potential advocates, right, at a policy level in their community. Or they could become a mentor or a volunteer in a CASA program, or with their agency. They could provide, around holiday time, agencies typically need assistance with holiday gifts for families or backpacks for kids, those kinds of things for school. So there are lots of those little volunteer kinds of experiences that they could take baby steps into a system and find out what this is all about. Even something like checking at their place of employment. We also support through the foundation an adoption friendly workplace campaign that says, if you give benefits to families that are formed through birth, do you also give benefits to families that are formed through adoption? It's just that simple. Time off, paid leave, the ability to help with financial needs if that's possible for the employer. So just dig into where you work and find out if those benefits exist, and if they don't, advocate for those benefits. We've got a great and easy toolkit that an employee can give to an employer. Participate in events like National Adoption Day, if it's in your community, the Saturday before Thanksgiving, and help with the celebration. Just all kinds of ways, but mostly it's about learning about the fact that this system exists, that these children are in care, and I can help be their voice as well, at a policy level, at a volunteer level, and potentially at an adoption level.
And you're so right. So much of it is being their voice, right? And so, one thing that I think is really unique about your story, Rita, is you used to work for CASA, which, for those that may not know, it stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. And CASAs play a really important role in the foster care system. And for some, that level of commitment can be
Yeah,
something really powerful, but yet very manageable for people to get involved in. Can you tell us more about what a CASA is, what the responsibilities are,
absolutely.
and maybe how
CASA
to become one?
volunteers essentially become the eyes and ears for the court when children are involved in court proceedings. So this is typically pre-termination of parental rights, and it may be that so the case is winding its way through the juvenile justice system, and the judge has to along the way make decisions. Do I send this child home? Do I free this child for adoption? Do I keep them in foster care but get some more services in place while we continue to discover what's going on with this family? And the CASA volunteer is trained to step into the system and has a child that they advocate for. They're assigned to a child or children, and they learn everything they can, but in a way similar to what the Wendy's Wonderful Kids recruiters do. They develop a relationship, they meet with the child, and they discover what does this child need. And then the CASA volunteer makes reports to judges, makes a report to the court. Here's what we think should happen. And the judges tend to listen to the CASA voice because it's an independent voice. It's not the child's social worker. It's not the child's attorney. It's not the family. You know, they're an independent advocate for the best interests of the child. And it's a valuable experience. And, you know, whether you're working full time or retired or not working, the CASA programs provide the training and support and manage you so that you can be have an active role in this child's life and in the court proceedings. It's one of the most incredible programs. And if I didn't travel all the time pre-pandemic, which I do, I would be a CASA volunteer, but I'd be the worst CASA volunteer right now.
You know, my children had an incredible woman as their CASA volunteer, and I think she was retired. And it seemed like a very low time commitment, but like a very powerful voice that she had on their livelihood and on their future. And so it was really helpful to kind of explain those pieces. Rita, I'm curious, for people that are feeling in life, I'm going to adopt someday, or I think I'm going to pursue that this year, or whenever that timeline is for them, oftentimes foster care adoption isn't even considered. Why do you think foster care adoption seems
two
forgotten?
reasons. We just haven't been loud enough about this exists as an option. If you're thinking about adoption, I know that you're going to default to domestic infant or international, but while you're thinking about that, concurrently, all we ask is that you also think about foster care adoption. But the reason people don't think about it is because we haven't been loud enough. We haven't provided enough information publicly to let people know that it is an option. The second piece is that even if they do think about it, there are a lot of myths and misperceptions that surround the children in care, the system. You know, it's too hard to get into this system. Oh, these kids are too old. I couldn't possibly step into this messy child welfare system. And so our job is to dispel those myths and misperceptions. Look, we know from research we do that about 50% of Americans believe children are in care because they've done something wrong, because they're juvenile delinquents. Well, that couldn't be farther from the truth. They're there through no fault of their own. They've been abused, neglected, abandoned. And yet that myth still kind of gets perpetrated sometimes in the press. You hear about, you know, a child that may have done something wrong gets identified as the adopted child of so-and-so. So that misperception gets somehow is embedded in how we think about these kids, or the messiness of the child welfare system, because we need to read a negative article about, you know, this county system had this issue. We've got to get over all of that and realize that these are viable, creative, amazing, talented children who have every right to thrive in a family and should have every opportunity to grow and thrive in a family. So we've got to do a better job of getting over the myths and misperceptions that surround these children. Now, do some of them absolutely need support? Of course. They've been through incredible trauma in their lives. Imagine having moved 5 or 6 times while in foster care and then trying to adjust to a new family. There are going to be challenges, but they're not insurmountable challenges, and they're not reasons to disassociate from the child welfare system.
Those are such powerful words, because you're right. Like this is overcoming these myths, and at the same time, it is going to be difficult, but it's not impossible. And I love the words that you put to that. And I was also really delighted when I was writing my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option. I received your endorsement for my book, and I was so thrilled because in my mind, the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is the biggest change agent, revolutionizing how children waiting to be adopted through the foster care system find their forever family. And I was just so humbled and excited to work together and to say, let's be a louder voice on this. And on my back cover, you're quoted saying, "We're excited about this book that shines a light on the incredible opportunity to adopt children who are waiting and wishing for a forever family. Marcy helps to simplify what can be a complex process and helps readers overcome their fears and doubts on behalf of the children who need us most. And something that really stuck out to me in what you said is you said on behalf of the children who need us most. Why do you believe children who are in foster care waiting to be adopted
When you
are the
think
ones that
about
need us
how
most?
vulnerable they are, right? They've been torn away from the only family they know. It may have not been a safe family, but that's the family that they know. They've been placed into sometimes a confusing and terrifying system. They may have moved multiple times while they've been in care. They're feeling the grief and loss of separation from their biological family. They're feeling isolated and anxious about what the next steps in their life are. And then, as a system, they're caught up in all of those complexities that they just may not understand. If our job as humans is to care for every child, and I believe that is our job as humans, whether they're our children or just children in our community,
Mm.
then what child needs us more than a fearful, sad, anxious child that just wants to be a kid? So it just feels like certainly sick children, need us as well. Lost children need us as well, but we have a system, a child welfare system that puts them at a disadvantage at times, particularly as they grow up in that system. And they need adults to step forward and say, this is not acceptable. It is not acceptable that we think this child doesn't deserve a family. So that's where that they need us the most notion comes in.
Which is beautiful because you're completely right that it's easy
Yeah.
to say, oh, that's an older child. They don't deserve a family. And that's so wrong. And it's missing such an opportunity and value. My husband's paternal grandfather grew up in the 1920s, was orphaned, and didn't ever get adopted. And
Yes.
I think sometimes the stories turn out beautifully where people can pull, themselves up from their bootstraps and make something for themselves. But sometimes that's kind of the luck of the draw, right? Like, who do you know and how did that support system work? And I'm fully with you that the children that may not otherwise have any sort of love and care and stability in their lives, like those are the ones that we should be reaching out to and seeing beyond some of the exterior things that might look rough right now that can really smooth out with
Look,
time
and
and
there
with
are no
love. So
perfect
I
families.
fully
There are
agree
no
with you.
perfect children. Go to any gathering of adults who have teenagers in their life, and as soon as you mention it, everybody's face screws up, right? So we know teenagers are a difficult
Yeah,
transitional stage. It's a normal stage. They're also the funniest creatures on earth, right? And they're the most creative creatures on earth. So we just have to do a little bit of mind shift and say, just because this young woman is 16, she's in foster care, she's been there for 4 years, and she may have some presenting issues right now, that does not invalidate her need for a family and the potential that she has when she finally has that security around her.
totally. That's beautiful. You're exactly right because it's a picture
Right.
of how are we looking at it? How are we framing it to ourselves? So, Rita, as we're wrapping up, I'm curious because the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption is located in Ohio. Here I am in Missouri. You guys have done so much nationally. And so I know anyone, literally anywhere, can get involved and support the foundation. What are some ways
Oh,
that
thanks for that
someone could
question.
support
Absolutely. First of
the
all,
work
we've
of the
got lots of
foundation?
free resources for people. So we want to be able to give out as much as we take in. And so if someone's thinking about foster care or adoption, we've got a beginner's guide to adoption that you can download, or if you want to get copies of it, we'll mail it to you for free, and lots of other resources on the website, davethomasfoundation.org. But if they want to step in and help us, we're a nonprofit public charity. And so we graciously accept donations and are grateful for people that want to become partners with the foundation. They can donate online, or they can find out more about us and see if their investment is worth making to the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. But they can also begin to advocate for children. That's one of the biggest helps for the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption. Spread the word, spread the message that children deserve to have families, that the foster care adoption is absolutely an option. That's why I love your book so much, that it's an option in this country, that we can help these children. So just help spread the message in their place of worship, in their place of business, in their community center, wherever they gather with others. Just begin that conversation about kids in their community that are waiting to be adopted. So all of those ways help the work of the Dave Thomas Foundation for Adoption.
And so many of those are things people can, after this podcast, they turn it off and they can go talk to someone. Like they can just bring it into conversation. Those are such practical and great ways. And I'm going to make sure that
Great.
I put a link to your adoption guide on my website, because that's something that I think would be an easier thing to access. Rita, this has been to me a dream to be able to have you on. And it's just been amazing because you are the expert in this space. And I think you've provided some incredibly valuable, not just information, but the lens that you share on how to see the potential and how to address the problem. And I just really appreciate you taking the time to help educate a broader audience and to join forces
Oh,
to help
thank you for
advocate on
that. And
behalf of
thank you
children
for
who
your
need us
incredible
most.
book, The Forgotten Adoption Option. We need as many advocates in the field and personal voices, when people tell their personal story and say, I can do this, you can too, or talk about their feelings about this. It helps, I think, connect others to the cause. And when you say, I did this, other people go, oh, I can do that too. And that's the biggest leap into making foster care accessible and making these children available in our hearts, not just as something that we couldn't possibly do. So thank you for your book and for this podcast and for all that you're doing to help advance this cause.
As a listener of the Finding Forever Families podcast, you are helping raise awareness about foster care adoption and the 120,000 children who are waiting for a forever family. You can also help raise awareness by liking this podcast and leaving a review. It really does help. If you'd like more information on adopting a child or sibling set through the foster care system, visit my website, forgottenadoptionoption.com. There you will find how you can get started, and you can even order a copy of my book, The Forgotten Adoption Option, which is available in paperback, audio, and ebook. Feel free to reach out with questions, comments, and your own stories. I would love to hear if you're signing up for training or where you are in the adoption process. You can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. Just search for Marcy Bursac. Thanks for tuning in, caring, and sharing, because every child deserves a family.